Hello and welcome to Dursles Doodles, and in this episode I'm going to be teaching you how to draw a tree in cartoon form. So basically you can narrow down a tree's design to two simple shapes. Okay, so it's the little stick and the tree. So there you go, that's the simple design. So, with the tree's actual trunk, always starts off larger towards the base and works its way thinner towards the top. So the general design is just a rough sort of pencil outline, like so. As you can see, it tapers towards the top and then branches out. So from here, it's down to you as to how many branches you want to do, but usually if it's going to be a cartoon, I would say narrow it down to about 2 or 3. So there's your 2 branches, to the right, to the left. And the tree's main bulk, that can also be quite simplified down. So with the tree's actual leaves, just some simple kind of bumps. Make sure never to keep it round, because it's never going to look natural if it's kept as a perfect circle. Even though it's a cartoon, I feel personally there should be a bit different. With the branches as well, so the branches inside the tree, so with that we need to hide them through the foliage. So the same sort of bumps we use to create the actual the outline, same sort of few bumps for those 2 branches. And what we will do with the actual branches themselves, sort of separate them into our 2 little bits, and then have them go down their own little paths. And then from there you can also decide whether to split them up even further. So there's pretty much the principle of a tree. And then to add a bit more life to it, I would make more bumps. Never do it in the same direction as well, because then that also creates a bit more of a natural look, because it shows that it has different form to it. And there you go. So now the base of the tree is pretty simple as well. It's just a little rough kind of line. That's just showing that it's on a bit of uneven ground. That could be soil. You could do it straight across, but then that would also look quite unnatural, unless you want it on like tarmac. But a tree on tarmac is probably not the most eco-friendly. So that is the tree, pretty much done. So now I'm going to go in with a uni pin fine line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a 0.5. So 0.5 here. So that's just a thicker line. And what I'll do is I'll go into the actual outline of the tree. It's not a complete science if I don't follow it. But the main gist is to follow the outlines that you set yourself, very roughly. So when it comes to it, we'll be erasing the lines. And the whole point with a tree is it's not going to be perfect. And I think personally, the more mistakes you make with it, the more jaggedy the line, the more the tree's gonna look natural. Like I said, if it is a cartoon, but more stylized, it's probably the best way to put it. It's a stylized tree. Then I think the main thing is making sure those lines don't overlap. Worst case scenario, you just go with it. There you go, mistake there, but we just work through it. See, because I'm being quite rough with the accuracy, I'm getting some very weird lines, but that is all right. And then we're just adding in our extra bit of foliage. And that creates that extra bit of detail. Add our bit of soil to the ground as well. So there's that tree's rough design. So that's the outline done. So I'm going to go over it with an even thinner one, a 0.3 instead of a 0.5. And then all the detail I'm going to add now is just in the bark. So with the bark itself, it's quite simple. It's just some extra little lines, a bit thinner and a bit more sporadic. Bark has to follow the main design of the tree, has to follow the same path. And then as it goes towards the branches, it will get a bit more harder to follow because the branches are going to be smaller. So that's when you have to take a bit of artistic license. You have to sort of leave it to the imagination. Do the lines at different heights as well, because it ends up breaking up the tree's design. It makes it look a bit more natural. So from there, that is the tree's design done. So what I'd do is I'd go over it with a rubber and just erase all the lines. What we're doing is we're removing pencil marks. So what it's doing is just leaving us with a nice, neat outline of it all. There you go, there's your tree's design. So what I've got now is the colouring bit for us. So what I've got are touch new markers, and with alcohol markers what you have to do is you have to start with your darker tone, because what you're doing, you're working your dark through into your light. So if we started the other way around and we put a base tone of lighter and we added dark, we'd be blending more dark in through to the light, and that will get rid of all the lightness that we do have in the piece. So if we start with dark, what I'll do is I'll show you that the light source is going to be up here somewhere. So there's your light coming down. So natural oak 91, that'll be the shadow of the bark. So all you do is just go in, make sure not to add too much pressure, because certain markers like this on certain types of paper will bleed, and it might well so bleed on this bit of paper. And that's the trouble with smaller lines. It is very hard to be precise with these markers because they are quite bulky. There is a fine line, which is the side I'm using. On the other side there's a chisel tip, and the chisel tip is for sort of broader areas. That on a piece like this is going to be a bit of a nightmare. So just the fine liner. As you can see, it is bleeding up there, but it's not the end of the world. Then what we do, this is our lighter tone, so this is 94 brick brown. And what we're doing is we're going into the rest of the piece, and we're just adding the rest of our colour. And the goal is to obviously fill in the whole piece, but it is to blend out that darker tone as well. See these little blending, these bleeding mistakes. It's not the end of the world, because a good artist can always think of a way to cover it up, albeit just add an even thicker line mark over the top of it. So you go slowly working through. And with a thing like a tree as well, it does pay to be a bit more sporadic and messy, because the tree's never going to be neat. It's sort of the antithesis of natural. Just going in and filling in these last bits. Making sure we blend through our darker tones. With these markers, the more sort of pressure you put, it does bleed, but also the longer you keep the pen down, because if you keep the pen, as you can see, starting to expand, so it is sort of a very delicate kind of balancing act. And so what we'll do is we'll go into the foliage now. So I've got two different colours. I got a dark and a light green, 46 and 47. And it's the same thing again. Darker goes in first, dark as your shadow. And what you're doing is you're following the curve of the actual tree. These little markers that we placed earlier. That's just to show that there's bumps or extra foliage, sort of that 3D look. So what you do is you work around them. And if the light's coming from the top, it's going to be adding shadows. So we're just going under those main bulks as well. The thing is, the more cartoony you do the tree, the less you have to follow sort of physics and light and balance. So yeah, still follow the sun. It's going to be more light on the top due to the sun's ray, but we still want to make sure that we get that sort of 3D curve to the tree itself. But like I said, it's all very natural, so you could probably put the darker tone wherever you want it, really. Just down to preference. So these are the ones that are overhooking the tree branch itself. All this will be dark as well, because this is where the bulk's hiding. And as you can see, as we're going in with that dark green, it does hide a few of our mistakes. It's not the worst thing when you do it wrong. As long as you're smart on how to cover it. And trust me, there's a lot of times in which I need to cover things. I think it probably takes more time than me actually doing the art. Maybe that's a sign that I'm a bad artist. There you go, just adding a few more. A few more little shadows. So we're almost making like C's at this point, because we're hooking the shadow around. But there you go, as we're getting to this point here, there's not going to be any shadow because that's when the sun starts hitting. So So depending on where your light source is, I'm just going to arrow, like arrows down. So I'm just going to add a few little points, a few little markers. See, that looks almost too uniform though, so what I need to do is break it up a bit. Put some sort of smaller tones. Remember, this is where the lights against us. Yeah, that's where your darker is. So then what we're going over with now is that lighter green. Lighter green, all you're doing is blending it through. And it does look darker, but as it dries out, these markers go towards the colour that's on the actual cap, so it does look dark, but as it does dry, it will go light. And making sure I blend in through that dark that I did. Because otherwise you're left with this sort of very divided colour. It looks quite awful actually. So I know this is done quick, but it doesn't need to be very smooth. I think as long as the blending's done. The blending's what gives it that body. It's what gives it that bit of life. As you can see on this side already, it's drying up to a lighter colour. And the good thing about adding two different colours together, it also like darkens the other colour that's been put as the base, so that dark green is becoming even darker in certain places. Just making sure I go over our little patches again. See these blobs? See, if you just go over the blobs as they are, they're just left as blobs. But if you keep going through with them, it blends them out. And the blending bit is what gives it more of a kind of natural look. Just take a few goes. Just going on these little edges again. See, depending on what bits you want blending and others you don't, you have to be very careful where you put your markers, because these alcohols, they just blend with anything. And you can get a colourless blender which does the sort of job. It's literally just pure alcohol that merges colours together, but sometimes when you put in like a green and a brown, the brown will overpower it and make it like a kind of mucky green. That's not what we want. So when it comes to borders, it's best to have everything set out nice and neat. That's why I erase it all as well, because sometimes the pencil marks themselves can blend with the alcohol and it creates like this awful graphite mess. But if you want to do it that way, it's not the end of the world. To be honest, there's 1,000 different ways of doing it, really. Like I said, the messier you get the tree, the probably the better, but depending on how accurate or how cartoony you want this is sort of the cartoony I go for. So it's cartoony, but it's simple, but it's based slightly in reality. Just making sure we blend a few of those darks again. As you can see, the more alcohol you put, the more you use these markers, the more it does seem to bleed. And it's also warping the paper because the paper's getting too much moisture in it. So that boils down to what kind of paper you have. There you go. So there's your tree. So it's going back over with 0.5 if you want it. I would say for the ground bit, there's a bit too much blending, but because I'm not going to put anything there, if I go over it again, I'll hide up all that bleeding that happened. And if you really wanted, you can go over the whole piece again, but I think personally you're wasting your time, because you're not gonna get it 100%. But there is the tree. So that's a nice little oak. What I'll do is I'll do one more. So this one will be a palm tree. The palm tree is quite simple. It's the same sort of process. So you've got your body, and then instead of the bulb for that foliage, it's going to be sort of spider's legs. It's going to be arcs, because the palm tree falls with the weight of the branches that are on it. So when it comes to the trunk, it is a line, rough line, like the other one. But it's split into segments. So basically just a rough sketch. So you just put some marks through. So the tree, so the bark is split into different shapes, and they're like little flower pot kind of shapes. They start off smaller, and they go bigger towards the top of the box. So little flower pot shapes like that. So it's like when you stack a load of paper cups on top of each other. And that gives that sort of curved shape. You can put the curve however far you want it as well, and however tall you want the tree. Obviously the higher the tree, the more of the curve, because of the way of gravity working. Coconuts as well, I guess, always have to go in. So I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 coconuts. This coconut is going to be in front of the other 2. This is going to give it that sort of 3D effect. And then with the branches themselves, they're quite simple. They're little sticks. Little tubes like straws, bendy straws, and they taper. Awkward position to do that curve. Actually, I sort of done myself in. There you go, taper and taper. So there's your sort of spider legs, a bit more bulky. I don't know why I keep referring to it as spider legs, but I always see it as some sort of crawling kind of creature. And so with the actual palm leaves, they're sort of like fans, bigger at the back though, and narrower at the front. So as we're doing these fans, we're making them smaller as we get to the front. following that curve. It's because the way that when they're falling, the branches want to fall with it. And because they're made of longer branches themselves, they'll fall even further than the actual body of the branch. Okay. And then with that one, I would say, because it's technically in front, I'll put that one in front of that coconut. Put a few branches on that side. So the main branch stem is still in the middle. Little branches fall like that. Okay, so same process again. We're going over with a 0.5. So we'll add our little base. There's our little flower pots taking shape. I swear as time goes by, I swear my hands get shakier and shakier, so maybe quick lines are the way I need to do it from now on. There you go, adding nothing. We'll get to our point of our coconut, so we know this one's in front. My mistake, a little slip there, but not the end of the world. So that one's going to be at the back. But while we're here, we'll do that front branch. Front branch. Side branch. As you can see, I've gone right over though, which you would think is a mistake. Just work around that. So you can do all this freehand, really. You don't need to do pencil marks, but I know how many mistakes I end up doing, so I'd rather beat myself to the punch. Since our branch is done, so what we do is we go into the little smaller ones now. Still making them smaller as we're getting towards the end of the branch, sort of taper them. Technically you can sort of put endings to all these little branches, but I think personally with a palm tree you want it to look like it's sort of running out of life. Remember, it's surviving on the bare minimum of water, so it can't really do with massive long leaves. What I'm doing is I'm just adding some etching marks just to show that it's bark. Sort of bark material. And starting towards the base and working way up, because you can tell from that it is, you don't need to do the whole entire bark part. So once I raise it, you will see that the branches will look quite bare, but when it comes to the colour, you can be quite sneaky. There's our tree. So dark colour again, dark oak. Light source is going to stay the same. It's going to come from the left. But with these things, because the flower pots, because of the design, when the light shine down on it, it'd be darker near the base. So there'll be more depth going down this bottom part. Remember, as it's working its way around, more and more of it is going to be shadowed because it's all facing away from the sun. Coconuts as well, because they're like spheres. Bottom corner. This one at the back will do completely dark just to show that it's behind. That's the shadow on that. And then we'll go back in with the light again. Blend our way through it. Same process applies to pencils, really. Darker tones always set the base, and then you work through your light. Remember, it doesn't have to even be a natural looking colour. You can put pink on it. I think as long as you get this sort of shadow, as long as you get the same sort of shadow design, then I think you're safe. Because the thing with cartooning, I think you want it simple, but you also want it to be slightly recognisable. So I think as long as you have the same sort of design, you're good. So making sure the coconuts are blended. So you've got a nice rounded coconut. So there's your branches done. Your bark done, I mean, sorry. Okay, and then we'll go through. So with the main branches, I'm going to just stick to the light. So I think the depth comes from our smaller ones, smaller little tentacle looking branches. So there's our light. As it does get narrower, as you can see, it's harder and harder to fill in that little bit in near the end. So don't worry if it goes over. Because to be fair, at that point, you've got so many busy branches down this end that you can sort of mask it a little bit. So I'd say if you're making a mistake, keep the mistake down on the inside. Just keep it down there. I have got a corrector pen, but you don't want to rely on it too much. It does come in very handy, but yeah, you don't want to rely on it too much because then you just feel like you want to do everything and neat. So there you go. As we're adding in that dark colour, we're ending it by the ends of our lines. And to be fair, the way that we're making it quite sort of a neat, the line work works with that colour, and it makes it look like the branches are purposefully that design. Filling those bits out. What we're doing is we're making sure we're following the actual curve of the line we're setting ourselves. You can go against it, but I think when it comes to especially pencil, if you don't follow the curve, then your pencil lines does show. And that's when also it looks a bit kind of off. Something doesn't look right. It's because you're not giving it that sort of form. So like I said, even though you're doing cartooning, you want to sort of ground it in some sort of reality. As you can see, I have made a few sort of mistakes. Like this was one of the most noticeable ones I spotted myself. So what I'll do is I'll just go over it again. Add a few more lines. That one's got a bit of a bulk there as well. It's looking good. So I'll get back over that little bit that I've done up. You go. And I'll do that little base again, same as I did with the other tree. And there you go. There are two different types of trees. One oak, one palm. And if you'd like to see any more videos, please subscribe and I will see you around. Thank you.